guys, welcome back to Vickis Car Clinic for Beginners. Just a couple quick notes. Wanted to first and foremost thank all of you for the overwhelmingly, unexpectedly awesome response to her first video. Obviously, it goes without saying, we were very concerned that there would be some concern on your end that this would change the nature of the channel from being a do-it-yourself advanced diagnostics channel to becoming, not that there's anything wrong with it, but, like an Eric the Car Guy or something like that. But the philosophy here, it was actually Vicky's idea. Maybe if we reach out to a new audience, we can prevent a whole new generation of parts changers from coming out, because if people learn their basics on this channel and learn the diagnostic methods that we use, maybe right out of the gate, new do-it-yourselfers will not just change alternators or do plugs and wires on a car that runs rough. They'll know right from the start as they move along that you need to do diagnostics and not just guess and fire a parts cannon. And that's kind of what we're hoping to do, is to help generate a next generation of people with a higher skill set. And so thanks, Vicky, for the idea, and thanks to you guys for the feedback. I was expecting you guys to tear this up, but you guys actually said that you really enjoyed it, and we've got some new viewers that thought it was some of the best training they've seen. So just wanted to say thanks for that. And what we are going to do today, what are we doing today?
We're doing my brakes, my front brakes.
That's right. We're doing front brakes, and you had a little issue. You had a little, the steering wheel vibrates when you hit the brakes a little bit, you were saying, and you feel the brakes pulse. So what a lot of people would do on this is what we call a pad slap. They're just going to replace brake pads. Even though this is going to be for a total beginner, we are not just going to do that. We're going to give you several options depending on your skill level or your comfort level to do from the easiest possible way to guaranteed fix our problem, all the way up to really doing some diagnostics and figuring out why we have the vibration and stuff. So it'll be up to you on what you're comfortable with, but at the very minimum, we will show you the proper way to do this, and we're not going to cut any corners, even though there are some easier ways. You've never done brakes before, right?
No.
No.
I've watched you do brakes, but...
You have watched me do brakes, yes, but she has never done it before. So if you have never done your brakes before, you just put yourself in Vicky's spot. I'm going to help you with it, and we'll get through it.
I have the most basic skills. So.
Yes, you do have some basic skills, especially after changing your oil in the last thing.
Very basic.
Yeah. All you need is basic skills, but you also do need a little more tools than you do for our first video on the oil change. So we're going to go over the tools that you need. It is going to be a little intimidating at first, but do know you're not going to use most of the tools. This is just a cover for various designs that you may run into. And the other thing is that, honestly, there is a very good chance that the very first brake job you do yourself will pay for the tools over the expense you would have had if you brought it into a dealer or a shop or something like that. So you might actually have all these tools paid for from your very first brake job, definitely on the second one. No question about that. So they'll pay for themselves in no time. So let's take a look at what we need. Unlike with the oil change video, we have to remove a tire now, so we need the tires off the ground. That means no ramps. We need a jack and some jack stands. You must have jack stands. You cannot do this job without jack stands. Never, ever work on a car that is supported just by a jack. You must have jack stands. The other thing we're going to need is a few chemicals here. We've got some rust remover. I like this PB blaster. You can also use WD-40, but especially depending on where you live, if you live in a rust belt, definitely some rust remover. Disc brake quiet, I will talk about this when we get to that step. I always use this. It helps to prevent the pads from chattering and singing, making little humming noises when you're braking after you replace your brakes. We also have some silicone lubricant spray. That's going to be for any rubber seals and things like that to help protect them. We have some caliper grease, so we don't want to use just any grease. I really suggest the brake caliper grease because it has extra moisture resistance properties. We will also need some brake fluid as well. Looking here, we've got a large rubber mallet. This will be to help us remove components without damaging them if they're stuck on. Brake systems sometimes can get a little rusty. Just in case we need it, we've also got a little mini sledgehammer here, a 3-pound sledgehammer if we really need some motivation. We're going to use this because I just thought it was cool, but we just need some kind of wire. I often use bungee cords. You can just use string, a coat hanger, but just some kind of device that we can tie the brake calipers out of our way when we remove them. The new rotors and pads are going to be thicker than the old ones, so we need some way of spreading the piston away from the caliper. And I know that a lot of you are like, I don't know what that means. Don't worry, it's going to be very obvious when we get there. But we need a couple of brake pad spreader tools, and these are different designs for different models. This one's really easy to use but more expensive. For a beginner, you can just get by with this one. Very simple. We're going to need a ratchet and socket set, a large screwdriver. We're also going to need a breaker bar. We're going to need that not only to remove the tire, because the lug nuts are going to be really tight, but also when we remove the caliper bracket. Those bolts are super tight. You're not going to be able to remove them with a regular ratchet. So we have a 1/2-inch breaker bar, which means we also need a 1/2-inch socket set. We also have a pair of gloves to protect our hands from the chemicals, keep them clean. And then we've got a couple of optional or possibly necessary things. Some models of brakes are not going to use regular hex bolts like we're used to. They may use Torx bits or they may use Allen sockets. So you might, for your model, need a Torx set or an Allen set for your 3/8 ratchet. You also, on many models, will find that there is a screw or 2 screws that hold the rotor in place. Again, we will get to that. So if you're not even sure what a rotor is, don't worry, you will in a few minutes. And highly recommended, if there are screws holding the rotor in, and we'll show what that is, you may need this impact screwdriver set, because very often that screw rusts into place and you're not going to be able to remove that screw with a screwdriver. You need an impact screwdriver, and this model will use it, so we are going to use this. A final thing is optional, and we're going to do this just simply because this is a diagnostics channel, so we want to diagnose Vickis' problem. One of the things is I am not totally sure that replacing the brakes is going to fix her problem, right? I want to know what is causing the vibration through the brake pedal. So what we have here is a dial caliper set and also some calipers. Now, you do not need these. If this is intimidating to you or the expense is a little bit exclusive for you, you do not need this, because you can just bring your parts up to the auto parts store and they will check them for you. But if you want to do your own checks, this is an optional thing. We are going to demonstrate it in this video, but it is not necessary for you to do a complete professional brake job by yourself. Oh, one final thing, of course, set of safety glasses. That's not only to protect your eyes, but it's also to protect you from the safety Nazis if you do a video of this. That would be people who would have no idea how to replace their brake pads, but they're going to point out that Vicky wasn't wearing safety glasses as a way of making them look more expertise than I am. First step is we've got to jack up the car. So if you look in your owner's manual, it's going to show you the jacking points, and it'll be different on different vehicles. This vehicle has what's called a pinch weld. Along here, we can see right here. We can see right along here, there's a little folded seam of metal, and that's generally where you'll find your jacking points. As a matter of fact, if we look up over here, we already have this side on a jack stand. There is actually a little recess in this pinch weld that runs along the frame of the car. The frame is the big, thick, heavy, supported metal that you can jack up and not do any damage. There's actually a little divot there where I'm resting this jack stand. The other thing is we want to make sure we're not to jack. If we look along here, we can see what sounds even like kind of hollow metal. That's the floor pan. If you jack up the car under the floor pan, you're just going to put the jack right through the floor of the car. As opposed to here, if we look along our frame, here it just has a solid sound. compared to that rattly kind of empty sound. Do you hear the sound difference there, Vicki?
I do.
So we can tell that that's going to be usually along this pinch rail here. That's going to be where the frame is, and you will be safe jacking up. All right, Vicki, so what we want to do is we want to set our jack along that pinch rail, but there is a problem we're going to have, and that is we want to do a professional job, and if we go along this pinch rail right here, we're going to bend it with the jack. So what I do is I have a hockey puck that I use right here that you see I've cut a groove in, and that groove we're going to line up right along that pinch rail so that it kind of lets the pinch rail settle into the hockey puck. And I just used a hacksaw to make that groove in there. Vicki, go ahead and move the jack into position a little bit. We're on the edge of the car, so we need to move the jack forward right there under the pinch rail. On this jack, you're going to twist the handle of the jack to the right. Remember, righty-tighty. You're going to twist it all the way, and that locks the jack, so now you can pump it. Go ahead and push down on the handle. As she pushes down on the handle, we want to check, and we can see that the hockey puck is resting right on that pinch rail. We are safe. Yep, push it all the way to the floor. And then pick it up again and pump again. And as she's doing that, we see we're compressing that hockey puck, but we're not bending the pinch rail. And that's good. And then you just lift the vehicle that way. All right. Okay. All right, so now we've got our jack stand underneath our pinch rail, and what we're going to do now is lower it. All right, you're going to turn the jack to the left now. Go ahead and turn it a little more. And you see how it's lowering now?
Yes.
And we can now go ahead and get the jack out of the way. So as you can see, we actually have the vehicle on 4 jack stands all the way around, and that's because we're doing some other work that we're not going to be filming, but you really only need the front of the vehicle jacked up. So we would do the same thing on the other side of the vehicle, and the other thing we're going to do is once we get it all set up and we're comfortable with it, I'm just going to push on the vehicle a bit and just make sure that the vehicle, it shouldn't even budge at all, so we know we're safe. What we're going to actually do is remove both tires. The reason we want to remove the wheels from both sides of the car is because the brakes are the same on each side. So if we get stuck, we forget how something went together, we're not sure what to do, we can always look off the other side and kind of cheat a little bit. So let's go ahead and remove this wheel. And some wheels will have a security lock on them, so usually you find that in your glove box or maybe by the spare tire. I don't think you have any security locks. Okay, so we've got the socket that fits the wheel lug nut.
We do.
All right, and you are going to need a breaker bar to remove these.
Do you believe I'm going to be able to do this?
You will be able to do this.
Doesn't matter which order, which pattern.
Taking them off, it doesn't matter which way. Putting them on, it does, but not taking them off. So,
am I in the right?
one of the things is that it may be if you've got, for example, a manual transmission car or something, we shouldn't have a problem with the car because it's in park. But if she does this and the wheels just keep spinning freely, then there's a couple things you can do. One of them is, again, make sure the car is in gear if it's a manual, or in park with an automatic, and it should lock the wheels for the transmission. The other thing you could do is before lifting the car, break the lug nuts loose with the wrench before you lift the car off the ground, and you can loosen them up before you start, and that'll help. You can also have somebody get in the car and just push down on the brakes for you and hold the wheel in place. But with automatic transmission, this tire shouldn't move on you. Go ahead and hook up your ratchet. Well, first of all, again, we want to make sure we're loosening, right?
So
Yep. What's our key for loosening?
righty-tighty, lefty-loosey.
Right. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Yep. Can you do it?
No.
If you've taken physics, you generally know it's easier to pull something than to push it. So I want to try to get this ratchet as low to the ground as possible so I can pull on it. What I really don't want to do is set it up here where I'm pushing it. I really don't want to push it there like that and just pull it. Let's do another one. Maybe I'll just go ahead and break all of these loose, although I do have another trick. Okay, what do you say about this thing?
I love it.
No, you go, say hello to my little friend.
Oh, okay. Say hello to my little friend.
Yeah, just like that. All right.
Matt has all the personality in this duo.
You guys are probably not going to have this. This is called an impact gun. This is a battery-operated impact gun. If you do a lot of this, this is a huge, huge time saver. So go ahead. Let's see. I believe I already loosened this one and this one. So you go ahead. You got this one, and that one.
Okay. Do you trust me with it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You'll see this will be a lot easier.
I haven't done.
There it goes. That's the way you do it. That one's already loose.
That's my favorite thing.
The first thing you want to do is make sure the tire is loose. In a lot of areas, you're going to find that the tire is going to stick on here like it's welded. So you want to hit the tire real hard. We can see the tire is loose.
Okay, it's like...
If that doesn't happen, you can take your hammer and try tapping around it until it becomes loose. Now you want to grab it here and a little bit down here, and then pick it up a little and set it down. You don't want to use your back too much. It's heavy.
You think I can lift this?
I think you can lift it.
Oh, hell. Okay.
All right, and just set it down. And now what do we do?
Roll it away.
Not quite. So we want to do one more thing. We want to look and we want to check the tire.
Oh.
All right, so while we've got the tire off, we want to check for any uneven wear. It doesn't look like you have any uneven wear. We can see there's good tread depth there, so it's not like you need new tires. If we see that it's really flat and low tread on this side of the tire, but not here, that indicates some alignment problems. And then we want to check over the whole tire, look and make sure there's no nails or screw heads or anything like that cause us to have a flat tire down the road. This tire looks perfectly clean. All right, now with the tire removed, we can see our parts of the brake system. This big disc here, like a record, for a record player, is called the rotor, and that rotor is pinched. Kind of like if you took your fingers and pinched a record, if you're old enough to know what a record is, right? And that would stop the record from spinning. That's what the brake pads do. So this is the caliper here, and the brake pads are in the caliper. They pinch against the rotor to prevent it from spinning. And the other thing that we have is the caliper connects to the caliper bracket. Because we're going to replace the rotors on this vehicle, most likely, we are also going to need to remove the caliper bracket, and that can be a little bit of a pain. You also have your lugs here that we just removed the lug nuts to remove the wheel. And then this big nut here is for your axle. If you're a beginner, you might think you got to remove that to take the rotor off. You do not. The rotor goes around the hub here, so you don't even have to bother with that big giant nut right there. So what we are going to do now is we need to inspect the brake pads, and to do that we are going to remove the calipers. But before we do that, I'm just going to show you something that's optional. I want to really diagnose, because I believe that this rotor is bad and it's warped. So this rotor surface should be totally flat, absolutely flat. What I believe is that it's kind of wavy, and that's what's causing the vibration when Vicky is braking. So I actually want to measure and see if there's any wave on here. You do not have to do this to do your brake job. You can just buy new pads, buy new rotors, you're good to go. You could take the rotors over to the auto parts store and they can measure it for you, but I just want to show you how this works. So the way this dial indicator works is when this plunger is pushed, you see we move and we can measure in thousandths of an inch. Each little hash mark is like thousandths of an inch. And what we're going to do is we want this plunger to rest right on the rotor, so that as we spin the rotor, if there's any imperfections, it's going to show up on the dial, because it's going to move that plunger a little bit. So I want to get this kind of right in the middle of my rotor. Once I get it right in the middle of my rotor, I'm going to tighten this down. And this is really sturdy and stable, so the only thing that's going to move that plunger is when I move the brake rotor. I'm going to go ahead and set this to 0. I'm just going to grab onto the lug bolts here, and I'm just going to turn the rotor. And as we turn the rotor, any imperfections in the rotor are going to show up on that dial indicator. And we can see that the needle moves about a total of 5 thousandths of an inch. and it's pretty consistent. It really needs to move at the most 0.02 of an inch, and there's specifications that we can look up to see that. I can tell you that we already did this on the other side of the vehicle, which is when I decided we might want to go ahead and film this. On the other side of the vehicle, it's a lot worse. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. Here we are on the other side of the vehicle, and this is really where her problem is. If we look on this side of the vehicle, when I turn it, see how there's more than 10,000ths of play. This is a tremendous amount of warp. That is a major problem. And what's happening is this is representing waves. This is not flat here. And when the brake pedal is being pressed, and we remove the caliper here, but when those pads are pushing against this, those imperfections in the rotor are causing the pads to spread apart and squeeze and spread apart and squeeze. And that pulsation is what you're feeling in your brake pedal. You can also sometimes feel that in the steering wheel a bit when you're braking too, if this is in the front. So this is definitely our problem here. So Vicki, what we need to do is remove the brake caliper. If we look, there's going to be 2 bolts that hold the brake caliper on. Okay, Vicki, why don't you point to the bolts that you think are holding the caliper on?
I'm sorry, so here and here.
So that bolt is actually for the brake hose, so we don't want to move the brake hose. So we've got one up here, and then there will be another one that looks just like it underneath.
Oh, is there? Oh, yeah.
That's it right there. Using the very end of the handle, push really hard. There it goes. You got it. All right, so now we've got our caliper unbolted, so we need to move this off from the brake caliper bracket. So just pull it straight off. You have to wiggle it. Yep, you got to wiggle.
All of this is coming off?
All that's coming off, the hose and everything. There it goes. It's okay to let it rest right there, except for the problem is that we want to make absolutely no chance that this falls, because if that falls, it's going to dangle by the hose, and if that hose breaks, we got a long day.
Okay.
So what you're going to do is take this wire, feed it through there, and then you'll use it like a twisty tie and try to get that brake caliper as high out of the way as you can. But now what you can do is remove the brake pads. Just slide it right out of the caliper bracket. Yep, towards you. There goes one.
So simple. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So simple. Exactly.
Okay, I was making it hard.
All right, and go ahead and set that down, and then there's one in the back. We've got to remove this bracket, because this bracket is retaining the rotor in place. So can you find the bolts that it looks to you might be retaining that bracket? It's those. These are the ones where we just removed the caliper from.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Those are the ones holding in the bracket. All right, now you're going to have to push as hard as you can. Go as near the end of the ratchet as you possibly can. It's fine.
It's fine.
Oh, did you get it?
Yeah.
Oh, you did it. Good. This is the second bolt. Push hard. You got it. Good job. You can see Vicki's confidence is building.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these bolts are very tough to remove. All right, you got it. And there goes our bracket assembly. Very good. Okay, so how do you think this rotor comes off?
Oh, I think it just slides off of these.
That's right, it does. It just slides right off of those, except we're going to have a little bit of a problem. And that is, if we look at the very bottom of the rotor here, you see that?
Down here?
No, a little above it, right there. See that?
Oh, there is something there.
There is a screw there holding the rotor in.
A star shape.
It is a star-shaped screw. That's why we needed our star-shaped socket set. So, not all cars have this. Now, there's a couple things about this. Usually that's a regular flat blade or Phillips screw, and if it is, almost certainly if you try to use a screwdriver on it, you're just going to round it off. It's going to be frozen in there. You're not going to be able to budge it at all. And that's where your impact screwdriver set comes in. And I'm just going to demonstrate something real quick here. So if this was a regular screw like a Phillips screw, what we would do is we would use our impact screwdriver. We would set it onto the screw, And then we would use a big giant hammer, and we would strike it really hard with the hammer a couple times, and this tool will break the screw loose so you can unscrew it. If you try to remove the screw without using the impact screwdriver, I can promise you, you're not going to have a very good day. So luckily with these Torx bits, you get a lot more, just a lot more connection with the bolts, so we should be okay. And you see there's a lot of play with that one, a lot of play. So this would just round off in there. Yep, so we need one size bigger than that. All right, now before we do this, this is really important. These screws are notorious for rounding off.
Oh no.
Yeah, it is. It's very, very serious. So what you want to do is you want to take your other hand and push on the end of the ratchet so that you're pushing towards the screw really hard while you're loosening it. All right? You can use the palm of your hand, you're fine. No, it's not going to release it because you're pushing against the screw. So push hard and slowly see if it'll go.
Why is it turning?
All right, and it's because because I have the wheel in neutral because I was adjusting some camera shots. So try giving it a quick snap.
Aren't they going the wrong way?
No, you're loosening it.
Oh, there.
Oh, you got it. You got it. Very good. So sometimes really quick, sharp movements, almost like the impact gun. Remember how easy that impact gun removed the lug nuts? Same principle applies here. The risk with it, though, is that if you don't have that secure in that screw, you're going to strip it. While she's removing that, I want to comment on these screws. So these screws are actually used by the manufacturer just simply to hold the rotors in place so that the robots can put together the brake system on the cars. These screws do not hold the rotor in place structurally. So you do not have to use these screws again when you install new rotors.
Oh, you don't?
You do not, and I recommend you don't because of this thing. They are strictly used in manufacturing. That is what they are for. Now, it's easier also for you to put the brakes together if you use the screws again. If you choose to use them, we're going to use some rust remover and some anti-seize to prevent that from sticking in the future. But I actually don't reuse those. That's strictly for manufacturing.
Okay.
All right, now we can get that rotor off. So see if you can pull it off.
Oh, it's tight, huh?
Yeah, it's on there really good. And this is a really common thing. Well, it should slide right off, but it's not going to.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing. We got two options here. One of them is we can make this really quick and easy, but it's probably going to damage the rotor. The other one we can do is if we wanted to try to reuse this rotor by having the auto parts store resurface it, we have another way. So let's try the gentle way first, and that is going to be with a rubber mallet.
And hit from the back?
Yep, so you're going to hit from the back. Now, we want to be careful here because if we look... All right, so what Vicki's pointing to is a dust shield. We do not want to hammer on that dust shield.
No.
Hammer on that dust shield, it's a really thin metal. You're going to bend it, it's going to rub against the new rotor, it's going to be a mess. So we don't want to do that. We want to hit only on the rotor, this big empty space we left after we removed the caliper.
Just tap it?
Yeah, just tap it really hard. See if you can loosen it.
Oh, I think I'm not really hurting it.
Nope, it's not hurting it at all, and the reason is because we don't want to hurt it.
Here too, or no?
No, you won't be able to tap it on the other side because of the dust shield. All right, well, Vicki, if you did that long enough, you'd be able to loosen that rotor, and again, we won't damage the rotor, and that may be good depending on what our goals are here. Now, we're going to replace this rotor anyway, so I am not worried about damaging it, so let's go to Plan B.
So let's beat it up.
Yep. Plan B is the 3-pound metal sledgehammer. Obviously, this is going to put divots into the rotor, but we don't care because we're replacing the rotor anyway because they're really not that expensive.
Okay. Can I hit it?
Yep, go ahead.
Spot?
Yep, hit it in the same spot and see if that works. There we go. Now you can get the rotor off.
Maybe.
Yep, just
Twist it.
just keep wiggling it off.
Whoa!
All right, good job. All right, now we've got some parts here that we can look at, and let's talk about some things here real quick. Okay, we want to now do an inspection of the parts that we removed, and we want to make some decisions on what all we're replacing here. It's a given that we're going to be replacing the brake pads. Now, if we look, we can see there's actually a lot of brake pad material on here. If the brake pad material is all the way to this metal, obviously they really have to be replaced. There's a lot of brake pad material here, but the problem that I'm having is that these rotors were relatively new and we already had a lot of warp with them. And I believe it's because we got really cheap rotors with the car, you know. So we want to get some much better quality. So we're going to replace with much higher quality stuff. But what we can do also is we could potentially resurface these rotors. Brand new rotors for this car are somewhere around $60, so we're really not too worried. We're just going to replace them, and it's also easier. But we could save money because it's about $20 if we resurface the rotors. And resurfacing means they're going to put it in a machine where it's going to flatten out this surface, make it new. When they do that, though, they're cutting metal off of here. And what's that going to do to the thickness of your rotor?
Yeah, it's going to gradually just minimize it.
Yeah, it's going to thin the rotor out. There is a minimum specification for how thick the rotor has to be safe. And we can measure it with these calipers if you have them. Again, you don't need this. The auto parts store can do it. So I'm measuring 30.13 millimeters, and what I can do, we want to measure in a couple different spaces. Right here it's 29.95, again showing there's warp with the rotor, by the way. And there's 30. So it's measuring around, the thinnest part that I'm measuring is just a little bit under 30 millimeters. What we need to do is look up a specification, and your auto parts store will have a manual that will do that. It will tell you if there's enough thickness that you can safely cut the rotors. Now again, remember, we would also have to include another 0.010 of an inch on the other rotor because that had so much warp in it. It's very likely that there would not be enough rotor thickness that we can safely cut the rotors, because then we would be below the minimum thickness. And if you're below the minimum thickness, the rotors are too thin. When you brake, they will overheat and they can fail catastrophically.
Are rotors under warranty?
That's a good question. So there are rotor warranties. These I don't think we've got warranty for. Generally, when I buy rotors, they have at least a 1-year warranty. And if you have warp or if they fail in any way other than your neglect of your brake pads, you can get them replaced for free. But I think what we're going to do, we just don't want to deal with this for the minimal expense. We just decided to buy new rotors. As a do-it-yourselfer and a beginner, you can never go wrong with that. If you just buy new rotors and new pads every brake job, sure, you could have saved some money if you resurface it, but you know what? That's probably what a brake shop's going to do, is just give you all new parts because they want to guarantee that you don't have issues afterwards because they're not going to diagnose it.
Do they ever resurface and tell you they gave you new rotors?
Vicky's question was, do they ever resurface but tell you the rotors were new? I don't know. I can't remember the last time I've taken my car to a brake shop. There may be some dishonest people. Yeah, there may be some dishonest people where they could say, hey, we're going to give you new rotors, but all they do is resurface them, but they charge you for new ones. You know, I don't want to say that that happens or not, but I wouldn't be surprised. All right, so that's enough about the rotors. Again, your choice. You can either try to get them resurfaced or you can just buy new ones. But what we also want to do is look at our brake pads. These brake pads are in good condition, but of course we have to remember these brake pads are kind of broken in and adjusted to that bad rotor. So I really don't want to use these because we want to have as much surface area connecting the rotor as possible. If the brake pads aren't smooth and flat, then of course we're not getting the maximum surface area. We're not getting effective braking. So we're just going to get new pads. The final thing we want to do is we want to inspect our caliper bracket here. And it's going to have what's called floating pins here. This is where your caliper bolts were that you threaded into right here. We need to make sure these pins are free floating and that they spin. We see this one is a little bit more jammed. This back one has a little more resistance here than this front one does. So we want to fix that. So right now we're going to treat that. Now if you can't move these things and have them float like that, you probably have a frozen pin that can also be part of your issue with your braking system, and you may have to replace this entire bracket with the pins. All right? So Vicki, I'm going to have you fix your pins here, and this is something that we should do anyway. What do you got there?
Caliper grease and silicone lubricant. Can you see it?
Yep, we can.
Okay.
All right, perfect. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your silicone lubricant.
Okay.
You're going to pull one of those pins to stretch the rubber boot.
Oh.
See how that rubber boot stretches there? So stretch the rubber boot out and coat it with that silicone spray.
Can you accidentally tear that, or?
If you really pulled it, but the silicone spray is going to protect it so that it doesn't tear in the future. Yeah, that's plenty. Now go ahead and kind of wiggle it around back and forth a little bit to work that in. All right, now we want to remove that pin. So what you're going to do is with one hand, pinch the very top of the boot. Take your other hand, grab the top of the bolt, and pull the bolt while trying to keep the boot in place, and it should come right out of the boot.
Okay, I see.
You can kind of twist it around a little bit, twist it, trying to get it out, and it'll come out.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. You pulled it right out. Awesome. Let's take a look at it. All right, good job. So you got the pin out. We want to make sure the pin is straight. It doesn't look like it's scored or rusted. We can see it's just pretty dirty. So go ahead and clean the pin off. Excellent. And now take your grease.
This?
Yep. And it comes with a little brush, and you just want to lightly brush the pin. Now, really important, don't put any on the very end of the pin. So go ahead and pick up your pin. Don't put any here, because what's going to happen is then you won't be able to compress the pin back in because the grease is uncompressible. So go ahead and do the sides of the pin. Just a light grease around the sides, and also that rubber part.
All the way, or just?
Yeah, all the way around.
I mean down.
All the way down.
Just to that dark spot.
Yeah, and over the dark spot.
Oh, okay.
Yep. You have to get the whole pin greased up like that. And again, we just don't want any on the very end, because otherwise then the pin won't settle in all the way. And now just go ahead and push the pin right back in all the way until it snaps back into the boot.
Okay.
All right? And now move it up and down and twist it a bit. And how's that feel?
Good.
Pretty smooth and loose.
Yeah.
Now compare that with the other pin.
Oh.
Yeah, see how resistant that pin is compared to the first one?
Oh, yeah, look at that.
Yep.
Okay.
So we need to really do a good job of cleaning that second pin. So go ahead. Again, remember your silicone spray.
Okay.
You want to stretch that out a little bit. Get the silicone spray on there so that we protect it for the future. And now go ahead and remove that pin. All right, good job. Let's take a look at that one. Yeah, we can see that one's got kind of a thick layer of really old, nappy grease on it, doesn't it? So let's clean that up really good. We're going to introduce one other thing. I don't typically like to use it because it's a little bit hazardous, but...
Great. Let's do it with me. Yeah, that was really good. Look at that.
Yeah. And that's going to be a can of brake parts cleaner. That stuff's pretty nasty, and really, I just don't use it that much, but I think we're going to use it on here. If you just spray a little bit of the brake parts cleaner on there, well, actually, you got it pretty clean without it. Yeah, so we don't need to risk our health or anything. So, yeah, you do like to clean. That looks beautiful. It's perfectly shiny. Okay, now we want to do one thing. I just want to make sure there isn't a problem with the caliper. One possibility could be it isn't the pin that's the problem. It's the hole in the caliper bracket. So go ahead and insert it as it is and make sure that it fits loose. Yeah, that's good. So we know that it's not a problem with our caliper bracket. You see that we got some grease in there still. You could go ahead and put the pin in all the way to collect some more of that nasty grease.
Yeah, it's pretty slimy.
Yep.
Oh, no. stuck it in too far.
No, that's fine. And then go ahead and pull it out. Yep, and just do that a couple times to clean off some of the nasty grease. You could also spray some of the brake parts cleaner in there, but really, honestly, it's not going to be necessary. You know, just in general, just do things one at a time here. You know, don't take everything all apart on both sides of the car. Just do everything one at a time. All right, that looks good. Go ahead and insert it in there. And now our caliper bracket is good to go. How's that feel now?
It's pretty good. Look at that.
Yeah, much easier than before. All right, good deal. We can set that aside. All right, as we mentioned before, we are opting for new rotors. So the first thing we want to do, we want to make absolutely certain that the new rotors are exactly the same as the old rotors. And what we're looking for is to make sure they are exactly the same diameter.
Exactly.
Are they exactly the same?
Yep.
Yes, they are. Okay, so we know that the new rotor is the correct one. You want to remember that the way the rotors work is those brake pads pinch the rotors. So we cannot have any grease, any oil, or anything slippery on those rotors. So this is a good time to change your gloves. All right, we can see all the grease and oil and everything is off of the new rotor. And we're going to burnish these rotors anyway, so I'm not really too worried about it. I'll explain that at the end of the video.
Okay.
You are now ready to start assembling your new brakes. So the first thing, we just do everything in reverse order. We're going to put that rotor right back onto the car.
Okay, so I forgot, does it go the big side out or the indentation out?
Great question. Great question. So first of all, it's going to go on with kind of the hat side out. But also, what could you do if I wasn't here to help you with that?
I would run over and look at the other side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could just run over and look at the other side, but I like to help you.
Thank you, because I don't want to get up after lifting that. Okay.
All right, now push it all the way on. There you go, until it's flat.
It's flat.
Okay, so you want to do a little rust remover on those bolts on the towel. It'll make them easier to thread in. Just a little spray of them right on there. Yep, that'll do it. Perfect. And then go ahead and thread them in. And what this will do is ensure that they don't lock up on you the next time you do this job. Kind of push on the bolt while you wiggle around on the caliper bracket until you feel it settle in.
That's as hand tight as it's going to go on that one.
Okay, you got it about as tight as you can turn it?
Yes.
All right, that's good. Now the second one should line up pretty easy. That looks pretty good. So now you want to take your ratchet.
Is that shifting okay?
No, that's doing good. That's doing good. So go ahead and tighten it just until it starts to resist. No more. Right about there. Now do the bottom one. And that way you can ensure that they line up and that everything's straight. Okay, great. So now tighten it as tight as you can with that ratchet. Is that as tight as you can get it?
It's as tight as I'm going to get it.
That's all right. That's fine. Tighten the other one the same way. All right. Now these need to be tightened really tight. Like probably, it depends on different manufacturers, but it can be 60 or more foot-pounds. Remember, to loosen these, we had to use the breaker bar.
Yeah.
So you want to grab your breaker bar.
Okay. The beastie bar.
Yep.
Just take it.
Yep. All right, and we want to make sure that that's on tighten. That's it. And you're going to put it on there, and you're going to try by feel to tighten it. Now, of course, if you're not comfortable doing this by feel and everything, well, you're going to have to buy a torque wrench for this. Most people don't use a torque wrench. And you want to tighten it about as much as you remember it feeling when you loosened it.
Okay.
And remember, you were able to loosen it on your own. So that means you don't want to use all your strength possible. You want to try to match how tight it was before.
Okay. Are you going to check?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to check it. Okay. Yep.
I'll do what I think, and then...
Yeah, and then we'll measure it.
Okay.
Good job. So I am going to use a ratchet that I am familiar with where I believe I'm going to be able to get this pretty close. So let's see here. Wow, you actually have it. Like, to me, that feels dead on. That was a really, really good job. Oh yeah, for sure. No question about it. Just to be sure though, just to be sure. You see, by the way, now that you've been using the ratchet a lot, how quickly you kind of get a feel for it? You did amazing. That is definitely it. Just to be sure, right behind you is a torque wrench. All right. And I'm just going to check it with the torque wrench, just because I know people on the video are going to say, well, you don't know if you tightened it right, blah, blah. If this bolt moves, we didn't tighten it enough. So are you on there?
Yes.
See? The wrench clicks. The bolt didn't move, so we know we're right out there. You were asking earlier the settings for this wrench, and this wrench has some settings on here where I can set it to whatever foot-pounds of torque I want. So I could set it to well, let's do this. Let's set it to 80, and I'll bet you that this bolt moves just a little bit. Okay. Meaning that we're somewhere between 70 and 80. All right, now, watch as this bolt moves just a tiny bit before it clicks.
Get zoomed in properly because I'm not. There we go.
All right, now watch as this bolt moves just a little bit before it clicks. See that? How it moved? That means we were right about at 70 before and we did it by feel. You can absolutely do it by feel. Let's check this one. This one's going to move a little bit, but we're just going to over-tighten just slightly. Yep, and that's fine. Good job. That was amazing. All right, our next step is we've got to get our new brake pads and check them against the old brake pads. Make sure they're correct. Show what's in the box there. We've got some new bracket hardware.
New brackets.
That's good. And we should have 4 pads, and they should be the same size as the old ones. The important thing is that they're the same size, and also the grooves are in the same locations.
Right, okay.
Those are the same.
Okay.
All right, perfect. So go ahead and put your new pad face down. Did you notice a difference between the 2 new pads? There's something different on one versus the other.
There's a clip on one.
There's a clip on one. Let's take a look at that.
Okay.
Okay, point to the clip you're talking about, right there. Yep. And what do you think that clip is for?
I'm assuming to help hold it on.
Actually, what that clip is it's a noise sensor.
Oh.
So what happens is when the pad material here gets too thin, this metal piece is going to start scraping the rotor.
Oh, I've heard that sound before. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes that sound that it sounds like, oh my God, my brakes are squeaking, I need new brakes. So that is a brake pad level sensor. Okay. All right? So you want to make sure that you have a level sensor on each side of the vehicle.
Oh, okay. So when you took those out of the box, is that the only thing we're watching for, is making sure we have one of these?
Yep, we want one of those on each side. Now, not all brake pads use that. Some brake pads, the way they do it is that the pad material, if you flip it around, the pad material changes when it gets really narrow. So as it wears out, there will be a different pad material that will start making the noise instead of having a little piece of metal there. So there's different styles, so you may not always have that, but you do want to have that sensor on each side of the vehicle, because sometimes you may have a problem on one side of the vehicle, but not the other side. And if you have the sensors on the side that isn't affected, well, now your brake pads wear out before you know it. All right, so we need to get those brake pads ready to install. The first thing we have to install is the new hardware for your caliper bracket. All right, for beginners, the new caliper hardware is sometimes a little bit intimidating, for sure. But it's really simple. Again, you'll always have the other side of the car to look off of. And honestly, it should only fit one way onto your caliper bracket. So if we look at the caliper bracket, we can see there's a little groove here that hardware is going to fit right over only one way. On the hardware here, we can see this little groove right here, and we see there's a raised portion right here that's the same size. Obviously, it can only fit one way, and it's going to snap right onto there. So go ahead and press it into place. And it should just snap right into place.
It's not really making a distinctive sound.
It often doesn't make a distinct, it's not going to click.
Okay.
But it is going to move all the way into position.
It is in position. It
Yep.
just feels a little springy.
And that's okay. It's designed to have a little springiness in there.
Okay.
So that your
Feel good?
brake pads don't rattle in there. You don't want the brake pads rattling in there because it's going to make noise. But that's exactly it. And again, if we were unsure, we just look on the other side. Now we need to do the top. It's going to go the same way. And it should hold in place by itself.
Okay.
Okay, now we can put in our brake pads. Okay, before we put the brake pads in, we want to do a little preparation to make sure that they don't get jammed in there, that they free float in there. The brake pads have to be able to move freely in there, but also we don't want them rattling in there either.
Okay.
So that's where these two components are going to come in. We're going to take our disc brake quiet.
This?
Yep, shake the can up a little bit. And we're going to spray an even coat, kind of like spray paint, on the backs of the brake pad, just on where those metal...
Here?
Yep, just where that metal surface is.
Just an even spray?
Yep, just an even spray.
Is that too much?
Nope. Okay. And what that spray does is it helps to make sure that the brake pads stay with the calipers when the calipers separate, so that your brake pads don't rattle in there and make noise. One last thing, and then we can insert them. You're going to take your can of grease, the caliper grease,
Okay.
and take your brush
Yes.
and grease the outer edges.
Just this ridge?
Yep, just that ridge, exactly. And just grease that ridge where it's going to go into your caliper bracket hardware.
Okay, is that far enough or down?
Nope, that's fine. And then the same thing on the other side. And you're going to put it on, and it doesn't matter whether you have the wear indicator on the inside or outside. Most cars from the factory have the indicator on the inside, so I just tend to do that for consistency, but it doesn't matter. You're going to go ahead and put that brake pad. You'll notice the pad has a little curve to it, and that curve is going to fit the curve of the rotor.
Is that what I'm...
That's the direction it's going to go. So let's get a look at that. Yep, you see how the curve of the brake pad fits the curve of the rotor. So it's only going to fit that way. Okay, Vicki, so you see how we have a little groove in the brake pad that you just greased up?
Yeah.
And we also have this raised portion. You see how that groove is going to go right over the raised portion.
Yeah.
And you also have it on the top of the pad.
Okay.
Up there's the same thing, and you also have it here. So one thing that kind of helps sometimes is you do one at a time. So fit that groove into the bottom.
Okay.
See how it slides right on?
Yes.
And now line it up at the top.
And then scoot it back?
And just push it back. And sometimes you got to lift up on this tab here a little bit
Give myself some.
so it clears.
Yeah.
Okay, you got it.
Okay, so how do I know it's right then?
How do you know it's right? Well, here's how you know it's right. So the way you know it's right, if you look here at this angle, you see how the brake pad is flat against the rotor. If you didn't have it right, you would have a gap like that, or you would have one end that's flat and the other end that isn't. But once you settle it in, there you go. Once you settle it in, it's going to be absolutely flush with the rotor like that. It can only go in one way and be flush with the rotor.
Okay.
So you have that brake pad installed correctly. Good job. Now go ahead and do the back one. So I call those the ears of the brake pad. I'm not sure if that's a legitimate term, but it just seems right to me. And now you got it greased up, so you go ahead and put it in. Again, it's going to follow the curve of the rotor because the asbestos surface has to touch. That's the way it's going to go,
Yes.
right there.
Everything's backwards. It's gappy.
Okay, yep. So what we have here is we can see, comparing with the other brake pad, we're flush on the bottom here, but there's a gap up here, and also you can see how this brake pad is flush with the rotor, and this brake pad is sticking out more. So we didn't get it into the groove on top, so we got to try again. So one of the tricks that I'll do if I'm struggling with it is instead of trying to put the pads in flat, I'll try to put them in at an angle like this, and see if I can line it up on the bottom and the top at an angle. There, like that.
Okay.
And now we got it.
zoom in on.
See how it's flush now? The other thing you want to do is make sure your rotor is in there straight. As you're messing with this, you can sometimes have the rotor move on you. That's one reason why it's sometimes easier to have that screw in there to hold it in place.
Yeah.
But by pushing the rotor flat and then trying to manipulate your brake pads, that can also help as well. But as you can see, these are installed correctly now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so now we just got to put the caliper back on. Now, there's going to be a little problem we're going to run into when we do this, and we'll see if you figure it out. But go ahead and release the caliper off of your hanger. But before you put it on there, can you think of a problem that you're probably going to have?
No, I can't.
You can't?
No.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and try putting it on?
Well, other than I don't know which way.
It's only going to go one way. First of all, you can see the bolt holes on the back of the caliper.
Yes.
And you know that they're going to line up with the bolt holes on those pins that you were just messing with,
yes.
With the grease, right?
Yes.
So you know it's going to go like that.
Oh,
and it's got to...
too tight.
It's too tight. Why is that?
Because everything's new.
Everything's new, and it's thicker. Right? So go ahead and flip your caliper around. And see, when you push the brake pedal, that piston pushes in, which squeezes your brake pads that are in there and pinches the rotor that would be in here,
okay,
right?
So we need to push that.
We have to put, exactly. We have to, if we don't push that piston back, there's no way we're going to fit that in.
Okay.
Because that piston is at the setting of your old rotor and brake pads, which were thinner than the new ones.
I see.
So we need to push that back, and there's two ways that we're going to do it. You notice we have a rubber ring around here.
Yes.
So what do we use anywhere we have rubber components?
Oh,
Silicone.
yeah, that spray. Do you have it? Okay.
Yep. So here's your silicone spray. Now remember, you don't want to get the silicone on the brakes. So spray it away from the brakes. So just spray it away from the brake pad.
Okay.
And that'll be good. And then that will settle in as we push the piston back. The silicone spray will work into the rubber gasket there. This screw settles right where your thumb is.
Okay.
Just like that. Now pull it back all the way.
Like this?
Yep. And you can see what happens when you turn that screw. You're going to move this forward. But we need something to push against the piston. So what I'm going to do is use the old brake pad.
Okay.
We need to back it out a little more. So back it out until that brake pad settles in. Okay, let's get a look at that. So there's our setup there. So now when you tighten it, you're going to push against that brake pad,
I see.
which is going to push that piston. Now, stop. There's one thing that we have to do at this point. When we do that, what's going to happen with our brake fluid? Okay, so when we do that, we're going to push the piston back, which means we're going to push the brake fluid back up the hose and into the reservoir. So we need to go to the top of the car before we do this.
Okay.
All right, if we look on the back of the engine, it'll almost always be on the back of the engine by the firewall, kind of closest to the driver. And this is our brake reservoir here. And what we want to do is we want to crack open the brake reservoir, but we don't want any dirt or anything to get in there. We also don't want it to remove the cap totally. Brake fluid is hygroscopic, which means it absorbs moisture a lot. So we want to keep the cap on there, but we just want it on loose.
Okay.
Now, can you imagine kind of a problem that we may have here after all this work?
Yeah, if you forget to tighten.
We forget to tighten it. So I actually have a different way that I do this. Kind of clean off around the edges of it so I get a good seal when I reinstall the cap. We don't want any material, though, to go into the brake reservoir. Now it's nice and clean. And I'm just going to cover this with a plastic bag. And that's going to protect anything from falling in there and also keep any moisture out. And then I'm going to take my brake cap and I'm just going to set it right on the driver's seat. Because that way when we go in and we test the brakes, I won't forget to put that cap back on. Okay, now we can safely compress that piston back into the bore and not worry about our brake fluid pushing up against that cap. Is it pushing in?
Seems to be.
Yeah, let's take a look. Yep, it's pushing in.
Okay.
Let's do another way, though. Go ahead and take all that apart, and I'll show you the easy way to do this. All right, this is a much easier way of doing it. Not that there's anything wrong with the way I showed you. I did that way for years. So what you're going to do is take that gun there, and you're going to settle it in just like it is, right there like that, just like that.
Just like that?
Yep.
Okay.
And as you pull the trigger, it's going to do exactly the same thing that the screw mechanism did. So now it's going to start pushing that piston in as you pull that trigger.
Okay, should I be able to pull harder?
Yep, pull as hard as you can until that piston is flat, even with the bore.
Well, easy for you. Okay. Is it going?
Yep, it's going.
Okay.
There you go. A little bit more. Now, if neither of those tools work, and no matter how hard you try, you cannot push that piston back, you probably have a frozen piston, and you're going to have to probably replace that brake caliper. The other thing is there are some vehicles, especially on the brake pads in the rear. For the rear brakes, sometimes the piston actually screws in instead of presses in. And you need a special tool to help you screw it in. That's why we're just doing front brakes today, because I don't want people to run into that. But with front brakes, almost always, they just press in. So it looks like you've got that piston pushed all the way back into the bore. Okay. So now to release the tool, there's a little tab on the back. Go ahead and push that tab with your thumb. There it goes, and that'll free the tool up.
Oh, and that'll stay?
Yeah, it stays back there. Okay. The only way that that piston moves is when you press the brake pedal, because that hose on the back, that pushes the brake fluid. Now that thing should only fit on one way, and you don't want to twist the hose up. See how that's twisting the hose up? So you want to go the other way so the hose doesn't twist.
And it can't close on me.
It will not close on you. You're not going to get your fingers jammed.
Okay. Just being careful. And it's going to go like this.
Yep. Fit right back over. Now you may have to slightly push those pins in, the floating pins, to give yourself room. But it should just fit right over the new brake pads. If it doesn't fit over the new brake pads, you may not have pushed that piston in all the way. And then push your little pins back on both ends as you push the caliper into place. You're there on the top, I can tell you. I see it.
Okay.
Are you there on the bottom?
It appears to be there. Can you see?
Yeah, it's there. You're lined up on the top and bottom. The smaller bolts are the caliper bolts. Now remember, before we put those in, we want to use the yellow spray so that we have no rust or anything on them. Yep, just a little bit of spray on those. Perfect. And thread them in. All right, again, you'll have to jiggle the caliper a lot of times to get the bolt hole to line up. So you kind of jiggle the caliper while you're spinning the bolt. And these ones are a little bit easier to cross thread, so you want to make sure that they go in nice and easy. You should be able to thread them in by hand quite a ways. Okay, now we have to tighten the bolts. Now we don't want to tighten these nearly as tight as we did those caliper bracket bolts. We also know that because these bolts are smaller. One thing we may run into, and we'll see if that happens, let's go ahead and get our ratchet. All right, is that snugging up?
Yeah.
Okay, so sometimes what will happen is you'll just be spinning that and spinning that and spinning that and spinning that, and it never tightens no matter what you do. So if that's happening, if you look really closely, there's a nut back here. And if when you're turning, go ahead and loosen it for a second. So if that happens, that as you're turning the bolt, that nut is also spinning, you can just put a wrench on that nut as a backup wrench to hold that in place. That's what that's for. But we aren't having that problem, and one reason we aren't having that problem is I think you did a good job of conditioning the bracket. So let's go ahead and tighten that back up again. And we want to tighten that to about 25 or 30 foot-pounds. So it's going to be not as tight nearly as you did those caliper bracket bolts, but it's going to be pretty snug. So let's give it a try. Let's see what it looks like. Go ahead and tighten it. That's pretty good. All right, do the second one the same way. So for you guys that maybe you've done your own spark plugs before, it's about the same torque as what you would do a spark plug. You know, again, everybody over tightens everything. You do not need these super tight.
You gonna check it?
I am gonna check it.
Check my work.
Yep, that's pretty good. Yep, you got it perfect. Now you've got your brakes installed on this side, so all we have to do is do the other side of the vehicle. The other side of the vehicle is exactly the same. So we're not going to do that on camera, and we will come back after we get the other side done. Okay, before I do that other side, I want to just check on the progress of our brake fluid here, and I want to clean this off here, and we can see our brake fluid level is just below the max line right there, so I know that I have a ways to go before it would spill out. If it was going to spill out, I would have to siphon some of the fluid out. We don't want to get that fluid on the car or anything with paint, because brake fluid is a very powerful paint stripper. But right now we've got plenty of room that I know I can move that other piston back in, and we're not going to overflow here, so we're good. All right, Vicki, you need any help putting that tire up?
Oh, no, I've got it.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, is it on?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh, you did it with one hand. That's incredible. All right, let's get the bolts on. For the approximately 8 years or so I've been doing automotive stuff, all the time I have had this great neck torque wrench that I bought from an AutoZone, and it's still, I use it pretty much just for tires and everything. Earlier you saw I had a Craftsman one. I usually use that for engine stuff where it's really, really sensitive. But I want to say this torque wrench maybe costs $30, and honestly it's a great investment for a beginner. Not only do you torque things accurately and make sure you're doing it right, but this will help you get a feel for how tight 60 foot-pounds is or 20 foot-pounds is. So I really recommend you get one of these as a beginner and you start using it so you get a feel for the torque, and also, of course, to make sure that you tighten things correctly. All right, and speaking about that, Vicki, why don't we bring that torque wrench over here, and I'm going to have you set it. So the torque rating for your wheels is 90 foot-pounds. If we look here very closely, see how we've got some numbers here? So we want to twist this until, you see where the 90 is?
Okay.
We want to twist this until this bottom part is flush with that line that says 90. So keep twisting it to the right. And it's kind of hard to turn, so we can loosen up this nut on the bottom here to help with that, to make it easier to spin. But again, the more we tighten it, the harder it's going to be. Go ahead and really turn it hard. See how that line is getting really close to that 90, so we want to get right to that 0, where the 0 lines up with the middle line here. And that's 90 foot-pounds. Okay, Vicki, so what you're going to do, just to make this faster, is you're going to use the impact gun just for a second on each bolt. So go ahead and just squeeze it just for a second, and then go to the next one. Again, we don't need to do the star pattern now. We're not torquing it.
Okay.
Yep. This is just so that you're not ratcheting all evening long.
Okay.
Perfect. Keep going. It'll click.
Really?
Yep.
Okay.
There it is. Okay, that was a lot of work, so I'm going to finish this up for Vicki. She did the top one up here, so we're going to go in a star pattern, always the opposite bolt as we tighten this. So I'm going to do that one next, then this one, like that, then across. Oh, this one's really loose. I think we've forgotten to tighten this one with the torque wrench, or with the impact wrench. Just like that. Notice the technique I'm using. I'm trying to get the torque click to happen while I'm in the middle of a swing. So I'm just going real smooth until it clicks. Not real jerky, not trying to feel for the click, just moving until it happens. You a little tired?
I am so tired.
It's a little bit of work. It really is. But, you know, you save hundreds of dollars doing this. But what we want to do now is we've got to remember, we push those pistons all the way into the bores in the calipers. So if we push the brake pedal, it's just going to go right to the floor because it's not going to resist against the brake pads until it meets the brake pads, and even then, until it squeezes the pads against the rotor. So what we need to do is go inside the car, and we've got to pump the brake pedal a few times until it builds up pressure. So let's do that.
Okay. Oh, the cap.
Yep. See, she almost sat on the cap. That's our reminder so that we didn't just leave this cap sitting in the engine and forgetting to secure it. So let me go put that cap back on. So I can remove my plastic bag off here. I'm going to put the cap on. And we're going to check our reservoir level. I can see it's right at the full. You can certainly remove the fluid from there with like a syringe or something like that, but we're going to do that on another thing when we do a brake bleed for a different video. But you could do that, but you're just emptying the fluid in the reservoir. You're not cleaning the fluid in the lines if you do that. If necessary, we may have to add brake fluid to bring it to the max level, but we don't know that yet until we get the brakes in position. So what we're going to do is have Vicky get the brakes into position. Okay, Vicky, so go ahead and push the pedal down. You see it has some far travel at first, but then it'll build up as you keep pumping. You want to keep going until it reaches the highest level, and that's pretty much it.
Is that it?
Yeah, that should be it. Does that feel pretty firm?
Yeah, it's firm.
If the brake pedal continually goes to the floor every time you push it, something's wrong. Something happened, and you need to go and check. Maybe you didn't line up the brake pads correctly. Maybe you forgot to put the brake pads in. Something, but it should build up pressure within usually 3 or 4 pumps all the way to the top. So you're good to go right now. So what we want to do is check our brake fluid level now. So if I put a light up here, you can see the shadow down here of the brake fluid. And now that the brakes are settled in and everything's in position, we can see we are low on brake fluid. If you look really careful, you can see down here where it's kind of wiggling a little bit, the brake fluid level is below the full line on here. So I do need to add a little bit of fluid. All right, again, we do not want to spill this brake fluid because it's a really potent paint remover, so I'm going to make sure to use a funnel here. The other thing, we want to use a new container of brake fluid whenever possible because we don't want it to have absorbed moisture. I'm going to add the fluid until I see we're at the full line, and that's right about there. And we are done. One last thing to do. All right, we want to lower the vehicle now. Again, before doing that, we want to make sure that the vehicle is in park. So if you moved it to neutral or anything to spin the wheels, you want to make sure that you put it back so it doesn't roll away on you. And just like the beginning of the video, I'm lining up my jack under that pinch weld there. And then removing the jack from the pinch weld. And we can just pull that pin to lower it, and then very slowly lower the car. Okay, so the final thing we're going to do, we're going to burnish the new pads, and what that means is we're going to get up to about 30 miles an hour, and then we're just going to hit the brakes as hard as we can. Do this about 3 or 4 times. What that's going to do, it's going to burn off the coating on the new rotors. It's going to settle the pads in to match the pattern with the rotors. You're going to notice the first time you do it, the brakes are going to be kind of weak, and you're going to be a little disappointed. After the 3rd time you do it, it should grab like a Formula 1 race car and make a huge difference. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that we are going to be able to stop. So I'm going to check, and Vicky's right. The pedal is all the way up at the top. It feels really firm, feels really good. I'm going to turn the key on. When you hold the pedal down while starting the car, when the car starts, you should feel the pedal move down just a little bit, and that's an indication that your power brake system is working, and it is. Testing the brakes a few times, I can tell you they feel really good. I'm going to hold the brake pedal down while I go into reverse and then into drive. Make sure that the car holds. If the car doesn't hold, then something's wrong. But it's holding good. We're going to go ahead and back up here. And as I'm backing up, I'm hitting the brakes a few times. I can tell you the brakes feel really, really good right now. Okay. I'm going to go up into drive. And what I'm going to check for is just a couple of light braking, see if the pulsation is gone. I can tell you there is no pulsation. It feels smooth as silk. And I also want to very lightly, with my fingertips, just very lightly hold the steering wheel. We need to be straight here, so I want to get on a straightaway. Very lightly hold the steering wheel and start hitting the brakes. I want to see if the wheel pulls out of my fingers to one side or the other. And it does not. It stays perfectly straight when I brake. So I'm pretty confident that we did a pretty good job on these brakes. So now what we're going to do is get to some place where we can get up to 30 miles an hour. Going to make sure nobody's behind us, and I'm going to let it have it. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3. And the reason I'm counting 1, 2, 3 is because Vickis in the car. She doesn't know if I'm going to brake. So it's for safety so she doesn't put her head through the windshield, right? We're going to try that again. Going to bring it up to about 30 miles an hour. I'm going to lightly hold the wheel and brake. And the wheel, you see, didn't shudder. It didn't jerk one direction or other. And I can tell you the car stops on a dime. Try it again. 1, 2, 3, brake. And you can hear the wheel screeching now. Earlier you couldn't hear the wheel screeching. So the anti-lock brakes are being activated there. That's all we need to do is 3 times. Now I can just drive the car normally. And I can tell you it brakes as smooth as silk. So we are done. All right, guys, well, we took it for a pretty healthy test drive, and I can tell you the brakes were absolutely fine. There's no noise, there's no vibration, there's no pull. The brakes are as quiet as can be, and the car stops on a dime. I just wanted to point out a couple things real quick. I wanted to point out the brake fluid that I was using is DOT3 brake fluid. If you're driving a much newer car, newer cars now, they have a DOT4 brake fluid, so you will want to check your owner's manual if you have any doubts on which brake fluid to use, but you can use DOT4 on pretty much anything. But if your car uses DOT4, you can't use DOT3 in it. So just wanted to remind you to check on that. Vicki, what'd you think?
It wasn't that bad. It was all new, a little exhausting, but not that bad.
It's hard work.
If you've done it more than once, I'm sure it gets easier. I'm sure it's...
So to be honest with you guys, when I do a brake job for a car, that's pretty much the way that I do it, and I generally take 30 to 45 minutes to complete the whole thing, start to finish. We probably, honestly, were filming, I don't even want to say how long, but it was hours. It was hours. Yeah, it was a long time, and it's because Vicki was new. She had to learn how to use the tools. But you got to give credit. You know, she really is interested in learning this stuff, and she doesn't want to be a mechanic or anything, but she wants to be better.
No, I've got one.
No, I'm not a mechanic either. But
you'll do.
Yeah.
You'll do.
I think we did better than we would have done at a Brakes Plus or something like that. Oh, yeah. You know, so that's one of the nice things. It's really rewarding to do it yourself.
Oh, it feels good to know that I helped.
You did. You helped a lot. You actually did the majority of the work. She really did the majority of the work. All I did was kind of some of the heavy lifting, and that's about it. But she really did the work, but you just have to learn. So really great job. Again, guys, give us your feedback on if these are helpful, and we can continue to do more, maybe even give some suggestions on what you'd like to see. If you are new at car and automotive stuff like this, and you want to do something, we will be glad to show you how to do it. So just let us know, and thanks for watching. We hope you found this helpful. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Bye.